What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco. As you might already know, this podcast is just two of us, Tofu and I. So even though my natural inclination is to say yes whenever someone asks us to help promote something based in the Bay that I 100% support, I can't. But of course, when Brooke asks, you have to answer. She's one of the founding members of Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid, which is a project making long-term connections with people who are trying to survive the genocide in Gaza and people here in the Bay. A year into the latest wave of the Israeli genocide in Palestine, they're having an event in Oakland this Friday on September 20th at Oakland Secret with food and bands. One of the reasons that I love being in the Bay is you get to be around people who give a fuck about other human beings and are genius at finding ways to keep our hearts and minds with people who are suffering right now in Gaza. And so today's episode has Brooke on, Lauren Gutierrez, and Mama Ganuush. And we talked about human connections and mutual aid as being key to surviving what's coming politically. And the topic of fundraising, you know, there are so many people asking for money, like all the time. This podcast is guilty of that. And sometimes it feels like we as individuals are throwing money into a black hole, which is why it feels right sending money to Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid, supporting people with connections with people living through the genocide. And Brooke and Lauren and Mama Ganuush are some of the people who are committed to continuing this work long-term in the Bay. Off mic, we were talking about how back in 2009, before Brooke and Lauren actually knew each other, they had both been with their kids at a protest, the same protest in solidarity with Tristan Anderson, a protester from Oakland who was shot in the head by Israeli military police in the West Bank with a U.S. manufactured tear gas grenade. Mama Ganuush was on for just the beginning of this call, but had to step off because, very understandably, they needed a little pause from reacting to the genocide on mic, but they do offer a little bit about how Israel and the U.S. have, in this sick way, deliberately tried to make it harder to get people money who are just trying to survive right now in Gaza. Bay2Gaza.org has links. You'll also find them in the show notes. We'll also link some of the past San Francisco episodes with Mama Ganuush and Brooke. And all of the past episodes are at patreon.com/San Francisco. Thank you to Astrid and Luke for becoming members of the podcast there. And also thank you to the band Locura, which is one of the groups that's going to be playing at the event on Saturday, for letting us use one of their songs on the outro of the episode.
All right, sweet. Lauren was telling me before you got on, Brooke, about you all meeting up through like the process of wanting to do mutual aid. And I think that's so sweet. Like I actually have made a lot of relationships or made relationships stronger through this process, which is, silver lining and a very, otherwise dark time. To that end, yeah, welcome. We have Brooke and Mama Ganuush are back. And I also have Lauren here. You all are, doing a lot of work around a lot of Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid work. And in fact, the name of the collective that we're going to be talking about today is Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid. I guess to start, would you all want to say a little bit about how you got involved with Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid and what it is?
I was working with a family and a project, a family who came from Gaza, and they came during the ceasefire in November. I don't know if a lot of people realize that Palestinians can't apply for a refugee status or a refugee visa in the United States, but it's a really big obstacle. If you're able to come here on a visa, you have to file either for a family-based petition, the I-130, or you have to file for asylum. And both are scrutinized more heavily for Palestinians. So the process for doing the green card application and getting it approved is very long, during which time you cannot legally work, but you do have to live. So our little group was working on that, and we had just really, like, in the recent weeks, kind of tried to make a name, tried to make a little grouping to provide some cover and privacy for this family that we were working with, and give a little bit of an umbrella for the other things that we were doing. And then there was this other burgeoning group that had really similar ideas and working on the same things. And we had called our group Gaza Bay Area Mutual Aid, and they were loosely calling their group Bay2Gaza or Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid. And we ended up connecting over the same interests, and decided to be sort of sister sibling mutual aid groups together. And that's just been really wonderful, really uplifting and cool.
And Brooke, were you with Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid from the beginning?
Yeah. I think that, to be honest, it's just been so hard to witness this genocide proceed. And I think that there have been very different phases of, it's been being in a very constant state of stress and shock for everyone. I think principally for Palestinian people and people who have loved ones in Gaza, but actually for everyone who's been kind of in touch with the daily horror. It's been so shocking and overwhelming. So when the bombardment of Gaza began last fall, I was doing as much civil disobedience and protest work as I could. I was stepping up in every way that I possibly could, because I believed at that time that we were racing towards a ceasefire, which I thought was going to happen. As it went on, I think that some of the reality of people being trapped there under bombs, with all of the immense, deprivations that were rolling out. By the time, I think the early part of 2024, a young woman that I know who is from Gaza, who I actually talked with you about, Toshio, right when the bombardment began, because she's actually a young writer and journalist, who had been part of Rafat Al-Arir's organization of young writers, the organization We Are Not Numbers, the young writers from Gaza. And so I had met her years earlier through that organization, because we started to become aware that even her relatively privileged family was actually in need of resources for survival and resources to get by. I started to have a little bit more contact with people in Gaza. I started talking with people about what it was going to take for people to register to flee, right? And I think we all know about this, that there was a $5,000 charge for people to register themselves on these evacuation lists. And so I started talking with friends, and, as a Jewish person, I don't always want to bring our narratives of fleeing genocide, historically, our families, into a conversation about a contemporary situation that's not the same. But a lot of us were actually relating our family history to having to flee, having to survive. How did we do this? And at first I thought, Jewish people are really going to be sending money to Gaza now. So for Passover, we organized and really tried to do a big push of funds to Gaza. We sent about $10,000 through a couple different organizations. And I was talking with my friend Matthew, and we just thought, we're doing okay doing this fundraising, but we think we could do more if we basically reached out to our local community. I think that this was when I started seeing what you were doing, what Mama Ganuush was doing, and what other community members were doing, especially Palestinian people, to fundraise for evacuations. So at first we started looking for evacuation fundraisers, even though we also saw that there were people who just needed assistance to survive and who did not want to leave. Obviously, because Palestinian people are indigenous, there is an ongoing attempt at displacement, and people were resisting that, even in these circumstances. It's heartbreaking to review people's stories. And I think it's extremely challenging to look at this, media landscape that we're in, people talk about it like the Hunger Games, and they're not wrong. Like, it's horrifying. And at the same time, what we chose to do in the Bay2Gaza collective was actually find people in the Bay Area who are organizing fundraisers. Maybe they're people who personally know people. Maybe they're people who have family there. Maybe they're people like our friend Shanae, who actually is living in Cairo and is supporting people directly who have had medical evacuations or who are continuing to sustain their family by sending support to Gaza. So when we were looking at all of these GoFundMes, and very soon after we founded our collective, the option of evacuation closed. And we don't know how long that's going to last. So, the border was bombed, the border is closed. Doing this work is like facing an extremely dystopian scenario,
Sure.
and just trying to do it with like an open heart. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And so we're supporting a couple individuals, and I can talk more about that. And we're also supporting an on-the-ground mutual aid project that's underway in Gaza that's doing a much kind of larger distribution type of work. They're doing a soup kitchen, they're distributing water, and they're distributing tents, and also sometimes cash aid to families.
Cool. Yeah, definitely want to hear more about people that you're working with over there. First off, wondering, based on what you were saying earlier about, well, in both cases, so you and Lauren came together after forming groups here in the Bay that were very like-minded. What do you gather from having done this work makes it so that the Bay is particularly it's a place where there is a lot of solidarity with Palestinians through this recent wave of genocide?
Well, I think one of the things that makes the Bay in particular a fertile ground for support for Palestinians, support for the Palestinian cause, is that there's a long history here of resistance around Palestinians. I'm old, old enough. I'm in my 40s, and I can remember back when when my friends, and I'm not saying who else, were taking blows in front of the Israeli consulate. This was 20 years ago. I have spent a lot of time with Tristan Anderson, who was injured by the IOF. Rachel Corrie is not from very far from here. Tristan's a person who's still in our lives, and so there's a history of connection. Not to mention,
could you say a little bit about what happened in both of their cases for people who might not know?
Sure. Tristan Anderson was shot in the head with a tear gas canister. I want to say it was in late 2005 or early 2006. I think early 2006, because I really distinctly remember the day that he returned to the public life in the Bay Area. There was an immigrants' rights march in San Francisco on May Day of 2006, and he was being wheeled in his wheelchair, and his face was still bandaged. And I remember seeing him, and I remember being just my heart was full and broken all at the same time. And then Rachel Corrie spent time in Rafah, and she was defending the home of a Palestinian family from being bulldozed. She decided to hold her ground, and she was crushed by the bulldozer, and she died. And her family has carried on. I believe their organization is called the Rachel Corrie Foundation, Corrie. And for me, I was really immediately interested in that case because I went to school with someone named Rachel Corrie and went, Rachel Corrie was cool. And then I looked and it was someone different, but I knew that she was a heart friend. Rachel Corrie and I were close in age. Those aren't the only two people that have connected people. I also wanted to say that I can't remember a time in my life after maybe elementary school where I haven't known someone from the Palestinian diaspora and had them in my life. And I think that's true for a lot of people who are here. It's the kind of place where we form a lot of relationships from a lot of different backgrounds. And if you know a person who's Palestinian, I think it's nearly impossible, thanks to Palestinian culture, not to connect. Like having had the immense blessing of knowing people from Palestine has changed the way I relate to other people. I think that's true for so many people here.
Thank you for that.
First of all, thank you so much, Brooke and Lauren and Toshio, for being in solidarity with Palestinians for years now and witnessing your friends and close loved ones. And you also witness a lot of like harassment, abuse, and also like loss. I am, because for me it's different because I was fundraising directly to my family members, and then when the Rafah border was blocked, it became more difficult to send to them specifically. There's other ways, like I know, for example, there are some organizations that have some foot on the ground that could help, but for my family, it just depends where you are in the city and what happens. So
yeah, actually, could we talk a little bit about the difficulty of just getting resources into Palestine very quickly? Like, I mean, things like that people in the Bay are going to be familiar with. Like, there's not going to be a way to Venmo people in Palestine. Western Union won't send to Gaza. So there are a lot of blocks.
Yeah, Western Union. So now what happens is that even if you're able to send money, it takes a lot of big percentage of the send. So for example, Western Union could charge up to 30% or more to send money into Gaza. And then it depends where this money is. If somebody could pick it up, for example, if you're north in Gaza, or in the Wusta or like the center Gaza, it's kind of harder for you to get to like Khan Yunis, you know what I mean, and other areas. So the way I was supporting my family initially was by registering their names through like an organization in Egypt called Hala. When they blocked the borders, we were looking into opportunities to send aid to my family through family members that we know, family of family, and trying to figure this out. Like somebody wanted to sell their car and they left Gaza, and then you could buy their car, and it's like it's just very difficult. And then it's very difficult to send money from Egypt to, for example, to Palestine, because part of the financial embargo on Palestinians and making it so hard to do any mutual aids is also forcing the neighboring countries not to support. So in Egypt, it's almost impossible to send dollars in except if you have someone. Like it's a whole hustle. And then there's also, and then mutual aids have a lot of different rules and regulations. But for example, there's ways to make sure to do this. But for me, because I send money to my own family, like I know who I'm sending money to. But even now that we do have money that we have raised, whether through the GoFundMe that we had to return some of it after the border changed and the GoFundMe reasons changed, the money was sitting in Cairo for like a while because there's nowhere to get this money into Palestine. And then when the money gets to Palestine, the prices are extremely expensive. Like an onion could be for like $60, you know what I mean? And there's no medical supplies, even if you have money. So if you're like, whatever you have is sending is bare minimum. The other thing is there is UNRWA tents that sometimes get support. However, not only people are staying in tents in the UNRWA tents, they're staying in tents everywhere. Like I have a cousin who's staying in tents in the entrance of Lober camp. Because her house was destroyed, and then she doesn't have her father's house is destroyed. So what I mean by that is like getting the money. First of all, raising money is a whole different animal, but also sending money into Palestine, it just requires a lot of effort. So that's why I just want to take a pause and really thank Brooke and Lauren for navigating a lot of these difficulties, because I know how stressful that is. It's also very stressful to figure out things, vet things, you know what I mean? Like it's a very difficult process to raise money, but also very difficult process to figure out a way of how to send the money in safely without also implication yourself or implying people that you're sending money to. It's been like the US government made it very, very difficult for supporting Palestinian period, you know? And one thing I just wanted to comment in terms of why there's a lot of Palestinians in the Bay Area or the Ohlone lands. There were early waves pre-1948. So before the establishment of Israel, there's Palestinians that immigrated for economic reasons, especially from the regions from like Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. And then the Nakba happened in 1948. So a lot of Palestinians moved here. A lot of Catholic families also moved to the Castro because this used to be an Irish, Italian, and a Palestinian Catholic neighborhood before the queers like moved in. And then 1967 was another wave of immigration. And then from there, there's a lot of diaspora communities that just spread out and start immigrating. There's also in the 1990s in Oslo, there's a lot of immigration that happened, another wave of immigrants that came to the Bay Area. And then there's also a lot of academic and professional opportunities for Palestinians because, as you know, Gaza literacy rate is like they are 99% educated, basically highly educated. So a lot of the people come here to work at Berkeley or study at Berkeley and different universities here. So I feel like the diaspora in the Bay Area in general of Palestinians could be surpassing like 75,000 Palestinians. That's based on like ACC, whatever numbers 14 years ago. So this is a pretty decent population of Palestinians here. And that's what Brooke and Lauren made sense is doing mutual aid for local Palestinians because there's a lot of us that has family in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Palestine in general.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, this is, all good reasons for, why Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid Collective exists. Going back to Brooke, what you mentioned earlier, what are your tactics as a collective? How are you working and how have you formed relationships with families over in Gaza?
The collective that Lauren's working with is working in a specific situation, right, where a family actually relocated to the Bay Area and they're here. Our collective has basically chosen to do the opposite, which I think the Gaza Bay collective is going to be doing as well, which is sending money from here to there. I think what's helped us the most has been Shanae, who's on the ground in Cairo. But there are a couple additional fundraisers. So maybe I can name a couple. But, one is that the Bay Area actually has a reporter named Rami, who has reported on KPFA on the Pacifica Radio Network News for about 20 years from Gaza. And so Christina Onestad, another reporter from KPFA, organized a fundraiser for his family. This is really a local thing. The Bay Area owes this family something, right? They've actually brought us news from Palestine for decades. And it's actually very important for us to be here and support them in their journey for survival, right? So that was, I happen to know Christina, who works at KPFA, who works with a friend who is a reporter. So that's one example. Our friend Matthew, just knowing someone who chose to go to Cairo and to do this work meant that Shanae actually joined our collective from Cairo. We rarely get to talk with her because the time difference is really big. But as she has found a couple people that she wants to work with long term, we have two really ongoing fundraisers. One is for a young man named Khaled, who lost most of his family in an Israeli airstrike. So his parents, other members of his family were killed, and he was severely injured. He was evacuated to Cairo. He's going to need some major surgeries in the next year. So I really want to right now say that people actually should consider donating to our collective where money is going directly to Khaled's family. To Khaled, his fiance, I believe, is still in Gaza. His brother, who he hasn't been able to be in contact with, he hasn't been able to find, but he's going to be in Cairo getting some serious medical attention. He will be an amputee. And so we're going to be supporting him for the long term. Another young man is a medical student. His name is Mohammed, and he's responsible for a family of more than 10 people. While he initially set up his fundraiser to evacuate his family because he's in Cairo and was hoping that he would be able to bring his family there, at this point, his fundraiser is actually just going to his family's ongoing survival. Those are two people who Shanae, who's in our collective, is in direct touch with. And so that's another way that we found these people to connect with. Another project that we're working on is just supporting a larger distribution work that's happening on the ground in Gaza. It's called Dahoun Mutual Aid, and people can find it on Instagram. It's DAHNOUN. And you can see there some of the work that they've done. We also had a member of the collective who actually recently moved, but she has some close friends in Gaza. So we also did a fundraiser for them. And that included supporting a newly created soup kitchen. Because I think what's happening is that people in Gaza are very industrious and they're doing new projects all the time. So people are setting up water distribution projects. People are setting up soup kitchens. People are setting up tent distribution sites. And it's just about getting in contact with them, which we can only do when we're in contact either with people in Cairo or people who are in Gaza.
Yeah. I mean, that's, huge part of this work. So, I mean, thank you. Thank you for doing it.
Hello everyone, Tofu here again for another ad break. Since this episode is talking about mutual aid, I want to first take the time to promote the Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid Collective. Happening this Saturday, September 20th in Oakland, Bay2Gaza is hosting a benefit concert, so please check out the links in the description or go to their Instagram for more information on the event and to check out their other fundraisers. And if you want to support the show directly, you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/sadfrancisco. There you'll find all of our past episodes and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Toshio and I just filmed episode 2 where we basically talked about how we try to ethically consume and produce content. Follow us again on all of our socials and give us a rating or like on whatever audio platform or video platform you're listening to this on. We also just reached 50 Patreon subscribers, which is crazy to me. So I just want to personally thank all of you for helping me keep the lights on. And that's basically it. Ad read done, and now back to the episode.
One of the questions that I sent you all ahead of time was, are there creative ways that you have noticed people who have been organizing almost like a year into the latest wave of genocide, how people have been avoiding burnout? But I think in part that kind of answers it. I think that once you have a person that is on the other end of some of the mutual aid work, as opposed to, people throwing money into maybe a GoFundMe where they're not exactly sure where it goes. I feel like you can't burn out when you have these relationships with people. And maybe that's, again, why the networks being strong already here in the Bay lead to there being more work.
Why mutual aid is sort of the pathway of survival in the same way that our liberation, safety, so on, is connected with that of Palestinians and that of many people around the world who are displaced or facing genocide, or how everything is tied together. Mutual aid is the way that we are going to be able to save each other going forward. And in the United States, we have a massive hurdle, bigger than anywhere probably in the world, bigger than Europe. We are so stratified, so isolated here. Our culture is so alienating. Just in the last 5 years, the difference between how often we see each other, connect with each other, support each other, it's dramatic. It's stark. It's very dangerous in terms of where we're headed politically. And so when we find something that we all care about, or that many of us care about, and come together and form networks of people who want to do that work, there's, I think, 2 things that really need to happen for it to be mutual aid. One is that those of us in the project can see that there's a benefit to us, whatever that is. It could be a very big theoretical, my liberation is tied to that of Palestinians, therefore I act in solidarity with them. I see the benefit that way. It can be that far. It can be, I recently experienced a very difficult personal loss. The people who offered me the most love and support, the kindest words, were either in Gaza or had evacuated from Gaza, right? So like, I can see directly in my life that these relationships are deep, meaningful, lasting, and mean a lot to me personally. So one piece is that we see that through the work we're benefiting, it's mutual. And then the other piece is that as we form these networks, we form relationships with one another, and they extend beyond the direct work that we're doing. Because that's these types of networks and these types of projects are really, in my opinion, the cornerstone of how we will survive the times to come, or as I like to call it, and I'm dark. I like to say, when the quadcopters come for us, when the quadcopters are outside my window, I know who my people are, and I want everybody to know who their people are. And so I think that it can seem to someone from the outside that like Bay2Gaza doing a lot of fundraising to send funds out of the US is not that type of project. I could see how people might see that. And I could see how people could think that our project, which is primarily focused on the livelihood of Palestinians who have come here, could be like, it could be perceived as like fundraising and charity. But the reality is that we're forming relationships and we're forming care circles that really matter, and they grow and they expand. It's like an each one teach one exponential growth factor. Even just in our events, when people are in line with each other, I see them exchanging phone numbers and becoming friends. All of these connections are going to be so important to us, when the quadcopters come for us, etc. And for our loved ones and for Palestinians now, they really, really matter.
Thank you for putting it so beautifully. Yeah, especially, I mean, I think about like we're in this like tech center and how the like tech industry is kind of, as you said, like part of the last 5 years being like so isolating has had to do with having more platforms, more devices mediating our connections to one another, leading to more isolation. And yeah, it's so true. Like those connections are going to be so important. They are important. Brooke, did you have anything to add? Like, something that keeps you from burning out? I mean, you are like tireless. Like I'm in awe sometimes of like how hard you could go. Just like really appreciate all of what I've seen you do over the past year plus of getting to know you better.
I mean, thank you so much, Toshio. And it's like, I think the feeling's mutual, because I think actually all of us here probably see each other and it feels like we're all kind of going hard. And I think that's because we're analyzing the conditions that we're in and we're responding to them. And I think what feels actually to me deeply dystopian is watching people observe the circumstances that we're in and not responding to them. I find that very difficult. That freeze response, that denial, it really impacts me. So, having said that, to be surrounded by people who are mobilized and who actually want to understand ways that we can come together and work together, I think is a very good antidote, to burnout. And I think in mutual aid collectives, there is a kind of built-in understanding that there's going to be some step up, step back. And that's because we actually want to, we come with compassion and we want to be part of each other's lives. These are non-hierarchical groups where we're actually trying to come together to form positive relationships with each other. And just that premise alone, it has a collective sensibility. It already is countering the incredible, hyper individualism beyond the individualism that already is instated in, capitalism and neoliberal capitalism, especially. So, I mean, that already feels like so joyful in a way, which is actually kind of jarring because, like I mentioned, actually looking through the hundreds of, fundraisers that I've looked through and the people that we've talked to, there are times when it overwhelms me, it overwhelms my heart and it overwhelms my spirit. And so the fact that we need each other to get through this might also help. There are times when we actually lean on each other emotionally. And I think that also might actually help prevent the kind of burnout which comes from us burdening ourselves that we have to carry it all alone. So, and in terms of like creative fundraising, the actual activities that we do are beautiful and joyful, and they can be fun.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that people talk about and maybe even argue about. Like maybe there are people who feel like we should only be going out there and showing our rage, our righteous rage.
Right. Sure.
Because what is happening is so sick. What is happening is so depraved that we should be disgusted and we should be enraged and we should be able to show that in public and we should be able to go nuts in public because we are literally witnessing a genocide, right? And Palestinian people collectively chose to expose the conditions in which they are living and dying. They made that choice. And it is so profoundly dystopian that even though they put their own suffering on screen, accessible to all, that it is ongoing, right? So I completely understand people saying, don't go out and enjoy food together right now. Don't go out and dance together right now. And yet these are the activities that we are choosing to do. We're choosing to do these connective and community building activities that Lauren talked about. And I don't want to be dogmatic and say, I know we're right. I don't know we're right. But if you're asking me how people are trying to keep going, to genuinely build power for Palestinian people, to put money and resources into Palestinian people's hands so that they determine their choices and the circumstances of their lives, the way that we're doing it is to reinvest in our connections with each other and our social world. So this has included like a fry bread fundraiser that happened as a part of the Mission Map project. That was such a beautiful event that people just chose to do. And they said, hey, this is going to benefit the Bay2Gaza fundraisers that are happening, because they knew that we had already looked through and made choices about where to direct funds. And that $950 that they made that night went directly to Mohammed's family. We had our friend Lacey made a beautiful t-shirt during Pride, a No Pride and Genocide t-shirt, and sold it at a local queer bar. I think it ended up being a couple $1,000s. I actually don't remember. Maybe that was $1,500 or $2,000. That, again, like, we actually didn't do that. Lacey went, printed the shirt, sold the shirt, and transferred the money to us, and we distributed that money among a couple of fundraisers. And I think that folks know, so I just want to promote while we're on this show that we're going to be having a benefit show. There's going to be a DJ REB, and several bands. So Antifason, Liberation, and a band that I've been close friends with for almost 20 years, Lober, is going to be playing a popular and well-known Bay Area band. And these are people who are artists and musicians who they have been putting themselves out there for Gaza since the beginning. They've done numerous fundraisers already, and they keep going as musicians. And it's time to spend some time together. We're going to sell some art there. We're going to sell food and t-shirts. Yeah, sure, it's about money, but it's also not about money. It's about us growing and building a community that can stand together during a time like this and keep each other going. I hope actually that people take this as a model. I would love to see evidence of mutual aid collectives on a local scale popping up in various places. I want to hear what people are doing in their own scene, in their own zone to bring people together. And we do have a radicalized community here in the Bay Area, and a very strong radicalized queer community here in the Bay Area. So, in Pride Month, there was a lot of energy to do these actions, and at other times there is energy through this kind of radicalism. But I've seen students at UC Berkeley put on a fundraiser and send $5,000 right to Gaza together, also in a day, and that's not because they have some long, strong history. It's because they chose to do this and to connect with each other.
I mean, it's been super inspiring to see people throw together parties, throw together encampments, throw together protests that involve so many people who, for whom this is their first experience in doing organizing. In some cases, it's this interesting, the alchemy is right in front of your face, where people are going from having maybe never attended a protest to planning, being part of a mutual aid collective that is actually having a super, super important effect on people's lives.
I want to jump in because you said alchemy, and I think that is a perfect way to describe a lot of what's happened for people. So traditional alchemy is the taking apart and putting back together in a more perfect form, right? And what's happened, I think, for those of us who are able to allow our hearts to be open and broken and cracked wide open, big enough to fit the whole Gaza Strip and all of Palestine and all of the Palestinian diaspora inside, is a coming apart and putting back together in a more, perfect, of course we're not perfect, but a more perfect form, in that it broke us. A lot of us were very broken to see what was happening in October and November and December, and there was no way to get funds in. There was nothing that could be done. The organization that we were seeing people doing in the streets was really ineffective for whatever reasons. This isn't the time or place to critique actions. I'll do that in private, but things weren't working. We were having beautiful inspirational banner drops, and it's not doing anything, and it was breaking us. And there was a taking apart of us in that process. And I think for the timing for me was toward the end of December was when I finally had a job to do. And when that job came and I couldn't do it by myself, I started to come back together again. And I watched other people who had been broken over and over and over again over the last months come back together again. People who had been broken long before October over many other things that are terrible and heartbreaking and soul crushing, right? I saw them have a job to do and come back together. And like for some of the activities that we do, people think they're just buying stuff or they're just like contributing to something. And they're like, thank you so much for doing this. This means so much to me. Sometimes they're tearful because they're like, I didn't know what to do. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to do something. And I'm like, without you, the project doesn't work. Like, thank you for being here. And I found myself on multiple occasions, like holding hands with a complete stranger with tears in our eyes, coming together and saying like, yeah, thank you for being here. It's so good to be connected to other people. So there's a coming apart as we're broken by the violence that we see and the injustice that we see. But then there's a coming back together. And I just, before I shut up, I want to shout out Palestinian culture one more time. Because in the course of this last near year, I went from the political study of Palestine to like a historical study of Palestine. So I can say from a scholarly perspective, I think it's been shown that Palestinian culture has been very well established to be a relational, loving, hospitable, welcoming culture for thousands of years. And in the taking apart and coming back together, my proximity to that culture has shifted. And the coming back together piece, I think it's coagula in alchemy, has been truly transformational to how I relate to other people, how I communicate on the small scale, how I do my job, how I raise my children. All of those things have been impacted. And, obviously I don't look at this, it's a Holocaust, it's a genocide through Holocaust. And I don't look at it as any type of a blessing. And I don't like the expression, a silver lining, but I have found so many beautiful ways to grow as a person. And I see the people around all of us doing that. There's a taking apart and coming together. It's so beautiful. It is an alchemy. It's a soul alchemy. Who better to lead us through that process than people from the place where alchemy was created?
I feel so lucky to be doing, just speaking with y'all. Like, I get to, on this podcast, speak with people who are able to string together words in such a way that I could just never. So thank you for that. In addition to shouting out the upcoming benefits, also wanted to update people a little bit as far as where things are at with people who have been participating in some of the actions that we've seen that have been so epic, shutting down multiple bridges in a day. How people coordinate during this, it is something else. It is amazing. But I know that Brooke, you were. Can I say that you were part of the Israeli consulate action, or?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. And I know that there was a court date around that recently. People went and could you actually say a little bit about the action and then what the status is?
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, for me, this is all connected. I know Dean Spade was just on the show this week, and I really follow Dean's thinking on mutual aid. And some of what he talks about is that, mutual aid both directly addresses the needs that are created through these violent systems that we live in, and they also expose the systems, right? And so for me, doing public action and public protest is part and parcel of doing the direct aid work. I know because of being in touch with Palestinian people, how very much Palestinian people watch the protest movements. And I've been aware of that since October. And it means a lot to me to be able to participate in my small way as one of, of course, like tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people across the country and around the world who are participating in direct action work. And that, that kind of coordination and the choice to continue to do autonomous action, I think that we have a small number of people here in the Bay Area who are very powerful, who are committed to continuing to doing autonomous and direct action, to shutting it down. And I think that I hope that we look even more at blocking the shipment of weapons and doing other kinds of direct economic shutdowns, because it is completely unconscionable that the U.S. continues to be the driver of this war by shipping weapons every couple of weeks to kill people in Gaza, right? So in terms of what's going on with the Israeli consulate action, I do believe that we're going to end up getting community service for that. There was a court date yesterday, and there may be another one, but the lawyers, we have wonderful lawyers, and I'm sure people know the incredible legal work of Palestine Legal and the National Lawyers Guild. And they're working all the time on behalf of people who are raising their voice, to do this kind of civil disobedience work. I agree that it's extremely frustrating that we haven't been able to stop these bombs. And I also think that shouldn't stop us. And I think we should be acting up in every way possible. And I'm grateful to have been a part of that.
Yeah. And I know people who have also been involved in both the Bay Bridge shutdown. As far as I know, people have already been fined or charges have been dropped, and people were given sort of like a deterrent against direct action with, potentially escalated charges if they were to participate again in more direct action. Do you all know?
I mean, I just want to say egregious Brooke Jenkins. We need to, at some point we need to say, we have these right-wing politicians who pose as progressives and they're throwing the book at activists in the midst of a genocide.
Yeah.
That is insane. So, and we're looking at the incredible repression of university students. We're also looking at the repression of professors. Whatever you did, you pitched a tent, you took over a building, you chained yourself to a door, you harassed an administrator. That is nothing compared to committing a genocide, right? The context that we're in is so extreme that it is completely unconscionable for people who call themselves progressive or anti-racist. I don't know what they're talking about. So, we have an extremely aggressive DA in San Francisco, and her actions are completely unconscionable. They're totally insane.
Yeah, the first day after, I remember, early October, she was tweeting in support of Israel and had to take down a tweet, basically calling people who are protesting in solidarity with Palestinians, calling them violent, and then has moved to make her Zionist supporters feel better about themselves. She's moving to try to use a felony imprisonment charge against people who shut down the Golden Gate Bridge 26. People are supporting them and their bail funds currently. And again, it's really very Zionist DA Brooke Jenkins here in quote unquote liberal San Francisco, who is bringing these very intense charges and actually even fished for charges when she, clearly didn't have much of a case, but wanted to bring these really intense charges. Got together with the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Chronicle was promoting out to its readers, did sitting in traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge for a little bit of time during this blockade cause you any harm? Fishing for, in a couple cases, I know that they have been attempting to say that people were missing surgeries or something as a result of being stuck in traffic. And I know that on the Bay Bridge, at least, that was, turned out to be completely false. So they're trying to fabricate some stuff. And I don't know, I'm hoping that zero charges end up going through. Any other words on that?
I just, I think that what you just said, Toshio, we're organizing, and I talk about this with people pretty frequently. At every level, we're organizing in an environment of repression, right? Of state repression. And so there's nothing about any of these this fishing for charges by the DA, or these weird words willy-nilly, like these protesters are violent. There isn't even a grain of truth in what they're doing. They would do anything to vilify and castigate the Palestine solidarity movement. There's no wiggle room there. So I think that, like, coming back to the concept of mutual aid, I think it's really important for us to take a step back and just think, right? I don't have to love every single person or be friends with every single person in the movement or approve every single thing that every person says or does to know that the repression of them is wrong. There should be no punishment of any Palestine protesters, because what we are protesting isn't only illegal, right? In every formulation of law that you might want to think of, including international law, it's also deeply immoral. It is a blight on planet Earth, right? And so anything that we can do to stop that, in my opinion, is the right thing to do. And I want to embrace everyone who is taking a risk. And I think what we need to create is a culture of support and a culture of care and a culture of response, right? Rapid response when people are under attack by the state. So if we're talking about the Bay Bridge 78, if we're talking about the Golden Gate Bridge, I think it's 26. If we're talking about professors who, like me, who have had their job threatened, if we're talking about students who have had conduct charges, right, or other kinds of things over protests, I think what we need to do is figure out ways to mobilize support and care for one another. And it's not about scrutinizing the actions that people are taking. It's actually about thinking about the gravity of Israeli violence and how extreme it is, and that we actually need to support one another, because otherwise, how can we build a movement? How can we build a movement in a climate of repression if we're not willing to support people who take risks?
Yeah. Before we wrap up, Lauren, I was wondering if you have anything to add.
Oh, just to say I'm in solidarity with everybody who comes up against the police. I have been there myself. Don't Google my name. Just to highlight again, it was a quick thing that Brooke said, which is that we're up against state repression at every level. That's every level, from like our web hosting to how we communicate with each other, to how we send funds, the neighborhoods that we live in. Like it truly is at every single level that there's state repression, just of our ability to survive, let alone to organize. And so I definitely think that it's very important for us in any movement to look at what we're doing, look at the efficacy of it, look at the consequences of it, be accountable to one another, decide how we want to move forward to be effective. Try not to learn the same hard lesson over and over again. Be dynamic with the state, all of those things. I think it's really important. I was a part of the anti-war movement in the early 2000s, and it's been a rough year watching a lot of the same types of actions and infighting and all kinds of other things happen again 20 years later. But I think, being that we are all under state repression, I think that there's a certain amount of, maybe a small amount of grace that we can always give each other. Whether you like an action, don't like an action, agree with an action, don't agree with an action, see negative consequences of an action and want to address them. One thing that we can all try to work on is being in solidarity with one another. And I realize that just speaking to the movement people, we have wounds that go deep. We have old beefs and we have wounds that go deep. And I would just encourage you all, anyone who's listening, to stop and read the memoir of a Black liberation figure from 50 years ago. Just stop and read some Assata Shakur, stop and read some Angela Davis, stop, like any, I'm just throwing those other Assata Shakur's number one pick if I'm making recommendations, but just stop and read and see the repression strategies, the infighting strategies, the ways that we undermine each other in the movement. And you'll feel like, you might feel a little demoralized, like nothing's changed, but they can change. And I had this therapist once who, I'm just going to give her credit because I won't give her credit for much else. She got me saying, in the past, I did this. Instead of saying, I always do this and I'm always like this. And in the movement, I think we should stop saying, well, we always do this. These people always do that. Those people always do that. And start thinking about, like, what comes next? In the past, we did this. In the future, what are we doing? And I hope that whatever critiques and lessons we're going to learn together, I hope that we're allowing just a modicum more grace on every side of the spectrum of movement people, a little bit more grace. I know that that's hard, and I'm historically not good at it. There's probably going to be somebody who's going to see this and be like, really? But I'm different than I was 20 years ago, and I'm different than I was 12 years ago. And the police, kicked my ass and threw me in jail on 7 felonies in San Francisco, So we should be in solidarity with each other. There's not one aspect of any of our lives as we resist the worst things that any of us could never have imagined before now in some ways.
Yeah, there's going to be drama, but we have the same goal as so many people that we might be having some drama with, I hope. And it is conversations like with people who I know have been doing this work, like you two, for a while, that make me feel so fortunate to be in the Bay, make me feel excited to be in the Bay. So thank you both.
I wanted to say, sorry to be annoying, but I wanted to say one more thing. Like, one of the other things that Brooke talked about was this is illegal. It's illegal in every possible way. Everything that we do to resist is legitimate. In fact, we're obligated to, right? Like under the law. But I would just hold that in your heart, that we have legitimacy at every level in resisting for Palestine and for all of us. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need to focus on legitimacy to the mainstream with what you do. There's no reason to appeal to people who would rather figure out if they're buying a TikTok neck massager or, getting an iced latte. I don't need to appeal to those people. I don't need to be legitimate to them. They can think that I'm a whack job. That's fine, as long as what I do has a material impact toward the goals that I have. And this has been a year of lessons of making very small material impacts and valuing them. So, but don't fight for legitimacy from the masses just because we have it. Just because, there's this idea that we'll be vindicated someday in the future. Who cares? Hate me. Don't like me. My kid was reported for hate speech to the district for making comments about Palestine. Okay, it is what it is. You think I'm terrible, that's fine. I don't care. I know I'm right.
Yeah.
And I think we find that validation with each other. We create a culture of support with each other, And I think that I just want to say, I come from a background of doing harm reduction, doing that direct work. It's so deeply satisfying. The best days are the days when I send money to someone in Palestine. It feels so good and right. And if I can, Toshio, I just want to make sure that I thank every person who is participating in Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid and every person who's doing mutual aid work for people in Palestine and everyone who's donated to our fundraisers. And just, I truly believe that directly supporting Palestinian people is better than any thanks we could possibly get. We do get those thanks actually all the time. And it's deeply satisfying work. And I just want more people to jump in with us.
Yeah. Well, okay. So definitely, if you're listening to this, consider going to the show notes and checking out Bay2Gaza Mutual Aid. And
Brooke, do you want to plug your event?
Yeah. One more time.
Yeah. So wherever this goes in the podcast, I want to make sure that I invite everybody out to Oakland Secret on September 20th. It's going to be a really great night. We have a show coming up with a DJ and 3 bands. We're going to be selling food there. It's a $15 entry. No one's turned away. Really awesome band. So we have DJ REB. We have Antifaçon, Calibration, and Locura. Really wonderful friends and people who have been throwing down for Palestine for a long time. I'm hoping that it's going to be announced online soon, but I think we're also going to have really cool t-shirts that match the show graphic and poster that was made by Diego Gomez, design nerd who's working out of San Francisco. So please come, throw some money down, dance with us, buy a t-shirt, eat some food, hang out. We're sending money directly to Rami, the reporter from KPFA, whose family is in Gaza. to Khaled, who's going to be getting some very needed medical assistance in the coming months and year, and also to Dahoun Mutual Aid, which is working on the ground doing distribution of essentials in Gaza.
Cool. And we're going to play this episode out with a track from Locura.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco. I am Toshio Moronic, and my co-producer is Tofu Estolas. Patreon.com/SadFrancisco is where you can find our past episodes and transcripts, and it's also where you can help us out with a donation. And if you do, it comes with some benefits like getting the episodes a few days early, and our gratitude for allowing us to keep making this podcast, which we love to do. See you next time in Sad Francisco.